Welcome to the Munro Review, where it's all about connecting, sharing, and valuing the arts in the central San Joaquin Valley. I'm Donald Munro. Today is September 10th. Once again, I am not in the CMAC studio, but instead practicing social distancing on a grim day as fires rage in Fresno County. I'm trying to think good thoughts for everyone affected. On this episode of the Munro Review, we have two special segments. The first is an interview with Jessica Garrison, a former Los Angeles Times reporter who has written a book about a murderer from Early Mart who almost got away with nearly 40 killings. And the second segment is a memorable moment for a Munro Review reader from Scotland. She won an opportunity for a Zoom visit with Miranda Ray Mayo, a proud junior company alum and star of Chicago Fire. But first, let's see some of what I've been covering on MunroReview.com. Despite the pandemic, the show is going on at the collegiate level. I offer a special report on the fall theater scene at Fresno State, Fresno City College, and College of the Sequoias. The short version, there will be theater this fall, even though it'll be mostly virtual and with no audiences in sight. The first title will be Darkside at Fresno State, directed by Kathleen McKinley. That show is in rehearsal right now, socially distanced, of course. The production will meld specific characteristics of live theater, video, and graphic novels. I also write about upcoming productions at Fresno City College and College of the Sequoias, both of which are opting for original film presentations. The common denominator locally is a concerted effort to keep theater education going for students and to keep audiences in the habit of supporting local collegiate productions, even if they're streamed on computer screens instead of live on stage. When those streaming performances debut, let's all be there watching and supporting. Some other stories I've been covering. I told you earlier this summer about Stella Freeman, a 13-year-old member of the Good Company Players Junior Company, who is raising money by drawing portraits of people as a fundraiser. Well, Stella was busy. She ended up raising more than $4,000 for the Junior Company, Good Company Players, Children's Musical Theater Works, and Shine Theater. And that included $500 from her own savings. Thank you, Stella, for showing us the meaning of generosity. I also feature an interview with Krista Van Gemert of Hanford's King's Players. She is one of many actors who participated in the theater company's Spooky Stories series. These short productions are based on famous short stories, adapted and directed by Hugh Munro Neely. I describe them as sort of like visual audiobooks, and they're still available for streaming on the King's Player website and YouTube. Now, let's get to our first segment. Author Jessica Garrison has a new book out titled The Devil's Harvest, A Ruthless Killer, A Terrorized Community, and the Search for Justice in California's Central Valley. It's about a killer from Early Mart who almost got away with it all. Here's my interview. Welcome, everyone. We are here today with Jessica Garrison, an author who has written a fascinating new book titled The Devil's Harvest, A Ruthless Killer, A Terrorized Community, and the Search for Justice in California's Central Valley. Thanks for being with us,
Thank
Jessica.
you so much for having me.
So you really write about two major characters in this book, I feel like. You've got Manuel Martinez, but you've also got the town of Early Mart. And I find that lots of people, even in the Central Valley, don't even know where that is. They don't know anything about the town. So I thought to start out, could you just talk a little bit about Early Mart?
Absolutely. So Early Mart is a little town, and in fact, this becomes crucial in the book. It's not actually a town because it hasn't incorporated. So it doesn't have a city council, although it does have like a town council. It has an actually pretty long and colorful history. But for a lot of the last few decades, it's been a community where a lot of farm workers live. It's tucked down at the southern end of Tulare County. You know, like a lot of these towns, it began as like a real estate developer's dream connected to the railroads. in the 1880s. And like a lot of these towns, it started with a different name. It used to be called, oh, I'm going to mess it up, Alila or Aaliyah. And then it became known as Early Mart because produce grown there would be early to market. And, you know, it's a close-knit community. It's a very poor community. You know, it's got sort of a lot of the, you know, issues that plague a lot of small valley communities. For example, its well just failed. And so it's in some ways like a fairly typical valley town.
And it's one of those towns that is off the radar.
If you spend a lot of time on the 99, you probably are aware of it. Other than that, it's not the kind of thing that would really, you know, there's nothing that would like draw you there if you didn't have business there.
So set the scene for us in Early Mart. You introduce the main character in your book, Jose. What is the time period we're starting out with? How do we start with him?
We meet him actually on his 18th birthday. He has made a decision to join the Marines. You know, and when he goes to talk to the Marines, he's hiding a couple things. One of the things he's hiding is that he is a drug smuggler. And the other thing he's hiding is that he's already committed one murder to avenge his sister. But they don't ask questions about that. They ask whether he's got a high school diploma, and he doesn't. And so he cannot join the Marines. At that point, get introduced to sort of his life and where he's from and how he grew up. And he kind of grew up in various places in and around and near Early Mart, and also for a few years in Mexico, really in the shadow of the grape strike. So the first part of the book, we really start to learn about these murders. And most of these killings were of people he didn't know. What was your introduction to him in terms of learning about the story for the first time? I came to the story because I used to be the morning assignment editor at the LA Times. And that job means that you kind of come in the morning and it's just what it sounds like. You're like, what's happening in the state? I need to make sure I have reporters assigned. So I just remember that to the extent that I was awake enough to remember, I was looking at The Wire and I saw a little snippet about a contract killer being extradited from Alabama to California to face charges on 9 murders. I think it mentioned that he lived, you know, I can't remember if it said the name of the town, but in a little town in Tulare County. And I had spent a fair amount of time reporting in the Valley. And so at that point, I didn't even know Jose Martinez's name. And the story didn't really provide, like, I had no context except contract killer, tiny little town. And I thought, what? So I assigned reporters, and out emerged a story that there was a man named Jose Martinez who'd been doing contract hits, allegedly on behalf of drug cartels, from this town. And so the LA Times wrote a story in the newspaper we call One Day Story. So it was just like the facts, which were shocking and amazing and colorful, but didn't really say like, well, how did this happen? And I, shortly after that, left the LA Times, and I kept kind of waiting for somebody to like come back and do the larger, like, what's going on here story. Because, you know, to me, the sort of real question was, you know, I've spent time in a lot of these towns. There aren't, like, people know each other. They know each other's business. How are you a contract killer and get away with and live? I mean, it's just like, it was very amazing to me. I kept sort of every 6 months, I'd be like, I wonder if anyone ever wrote about that case, and never found anything. And so then in about 2016, late 2016, still nothing. And I was like, you know, I'm just gonna make a few calls. And so I think I kind of randomly started calling any names I could. I know I got the name of one of the detectives, and I got a detective on the phone, and, you know, I left a message, and to my amazement, he called me back, which often police detectives do not call random reporters back. And he was like, oh yeah, this case is incredible. You know, and he just started talking about it. And then I somehow realized that I could get access to the police files. And that was incredible too, because it was like, they're like, you know, they go back to 1980. And they are just these incredible documents that tell not just the story of these murders, but, you know, the story of this place. They're so rich. There's so much in them. So that's how I came to the story. And we should say that yes, this is a book about a contract killer, about these murders,
but it's as much a book about the place, about how first of all, how could this happen? How could this one man kill more than 30 people over decades and just sort of go about his life? And it's also about this town that sort of got ignored by everybody, right? I mean, by the police, by the county government, by health officials. Was that part of what appealed to you then?
The story itself is crazy, right? It's like no story. And I've been a reporter a long time now. I have never seen a story with this many twists and turns. But I think the question that sort of kept me interested in it was the larger question of like, why did we let this happen? And I think the answer to that has to do with the history of places like this.
At one point, he calls you and asks, "What is a sociopath?"
Yes, he was going on trial, a death penalty trial in Florida, and his lawyers were fighting about whether that word could be said.
Tell us about him. In addition to everything else, he's just a fascinating, awful, really complicated man.
He does not hide that he is a vicious killer. And, you know, but he also, and this was something that like many of I think the first detective I ever talked to about him, before I'd ever talked to him, before I knew anything about the case, told me about, you know, the first time he'd ever talked to Jose Martinez. And he remembered thinking, what a charming man. This detective was actually also from the Arlington area. And he was like, you know, he was just so funny about describing life in these towns and what it's like to grow up in these towns. And, you know, it was just like a delightful conversation. And I think the other thing that is absolutely true of him is that although he is undeniably a vicious killer, he is also someone who deeply loves his family. And you can't, you know, you talk to many, many, many members of his family, and they all have a story about some time that like they were in trouble or they were sad or they were something, and he went above and beyond to make it right. You know, as one family member put it to me, it's like Jekyll and Hyde.
There are a few points that even as I was reading the book just really shocked me. What was it like for you to even kind of dive into those murders?
It's a funny thing, right? Because I think if you read the book, like there's a lot of murder in it, but there's not a lot of gore. I think the hardest, you know, the most sort of gut-wrenching part was talking to the families of the victims. In many cases, they lacked closure for decades. And many, many, many of the victims' families felt like nobody cared.
Another theme that really struck with me was this idea that local democracy doesn't always produce the best results. Everyone just kind of wrote this town off. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there are cases again and again and again where people in Early Mart, you know, and Early Mart is not a town, so they don't have, and they've never incorporated, where people were like, hey, Tulare County, we'd really like this. And the county would say, oh, we really wish we could, but we can't. There are all kinds of things that go into what gives a community political power, and Early Mart lacks all of them.
So one example in which Early Mart was kind of able to rally as a community came after these terrible incidents involving pesticides. Mm-hmm. And that scene in which residents of Early Mart were actually kind of herded into the middle of town and stripped and hosed down. That's a really amazing, appalling thing to think is happening in this country almost. Tell us, how did Early Mart, what has Early Mart been able to do after those incidents?
I mean, I'm glad you asked that, because I think Early Mart, you know, is a town also that has given us a lot of activists. In 1999, a farmer or his agents had a pesticide accident. And it was actually a soil fumigant, and it came wafting off the fields and over the town of Early Mart. And, you know, it was just about sunset, and people just suddenly, you know, people were coughing. And so some people fled the town. People that stayed in town, a lot of people had symptoms and got sick, and they didn't know what was happening. And they called the fire department, and the fire department came, and the fire department didn't know what was happening either. And so they kind of herded everybody into the middle of the town and told them, take off your clothes, we're going to spray you with water. Whatever the soil fumigant was, reacted badly with water. So they actually made it worse. And, there was a woman in town, Teresa de Anda, who was like, no, we're done with this. Like, enough. Because it just felt like they were getting the runaround. And she eventually organized and got real changes. Then she started kind of watching for when this happened. Then she would go and say, look, you said 3 people were affected by this, but I got 78 that were affected by this. And so eventually led to some changes in policy, at the state level, which I think has made things much safer.
As a reporter, and you've been an editor as well, you know that not all stories are treated equal. Did it make you think differently about this whole idea of news value and the fact that a story about a drug contract killer maybe got 2 paragraphs in the local paper, whereas if it had been someone else, it might have been a front page story?
That's a dynamic, unfortunately, that I've seen again and again and again. I think that, you kind of have a sense of like, oh, people are going to go nuts over that story, maybe not so much about that story. And this book gave me an opportunity to really think about that.
Did reporting and writing this book, did it change your attitude toward the so-called war on drugs?
I think it sort of confirmed something that I already thought, which is that, like, boy, there's a lot of drugs.
What do you hope people get out of this book?
I hope they like it. I think, as someone who has lived in the Valley and also lived in Los Angeles and San Francisco, I wish people would be more aware of the Valley. I hope people come out of it with a sense of like, this is a place I should care about.
And I know for me, it really made me think more about smaller towns. It's really interesting too, this memoir that's not ever going to go anywhere, right? Like,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if he's getting, people are like, oh, talk to me about this. I mean, maybe that's happening.
Well, it's a national book and it's getting coverage, and I could imagine some producer out there, thinking, this would be an interesting show to do. I don't know.
It's a crazy story for sure.
It is a crazy story. Well, thank you very much, Jessica, for sharing this story for us. When does the book come out, and where can people get it?
Yeah, it just came out this month. It is in bookstores. It is available on Amazon. It's available on Bookshop, which supports independent bookstores. And you can also get it, directly from the publisher.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
For our second feature story, this is a fun one. Miranda Ray Mayo is a proud former Fresnan who got her start in acting at the Junior Company. Now she stars in NBC's Chicago Fire. Miranda appeared in the recent Junior Company Foundation streaming cabaret fundraiser, and one of the very cool things she also offered to do was meet with one of my readers in sort of a backstage virtual visit. I held a contest, and get this, the winner really was from Scotland. Here's a look at the Zoom meeting between the fan and the star. You'll notice the writer popping his head in now and again.
I'm curious about your question. I'm curious about, also, how old are you?
I'm 18.
Okay, beautiful. Great time to be alive. It's always a great time to be alive. But 18 is fun and scary, and I love it. But yes, okay, what is your question? Beautiful Sophie.
I can't remember it.
You can't remember it. Okay. I actually had it right up here. Why don't you go ahead and ask just a simple question while I get your question queued up, okay?
Cast of Chicago Fire as fun to hang out with offset?
I would say even more so, because when we're on set, we're at work. But offset, yeah, I miss everyone. This is the first time in 4 years, 8 years for them, but it's the first time in 4 years for me that I didn't spend my birthday with them, that we all weren't together, starting July, because we're not shooting because of the pandemic. We all love each other so much. I don't know how it happened. It doesn't always happen on shows or work environments, but yeah, like they're lifelong family members of mine.
Well, that's great. So Sophie, here's what you wrote to me. You said, the question I would like to ask Miranda is, what is your number one piece of advice for people who aren't comfortable with the way they look? For example, say someone keeps comparing themselves to celebrities or their own family members. What advice would you give them?
The advice that I would give, I had this realization when I was auditioning. It's really hard to not take things personally about the way that, the way that I looked when I wouldn't get a job. And I thought to myself, it's like cooking. And sometimes your particular ingredient isn't going to be right for that dish. If I'm making lasagna, I will not use chocolate. Chocolate is an amazing ingredient, but if I'm making lasagna, I'm not going to use chocolate. And I think that applying that to myself has helped me even in relationships, just recognizing that, like, listen, like, my ingredient maybe just doesn't vibe well with this particular ingredient, but that doesn't make me any less delicious. I think that we have, as a society, have forgotten, what if I just allowed myself to exist exactly as I am? What if, like, the more that I love and appreciate myself, the more that I can be a gift to my community, to my society,
That was very helpful.
That's pretty awesome advice. The other question you had, did you always want to be an actress?
I wanted to be a singer first, and then through junior company, actually, I discovered musical theater. And that was where I was like, ooh, storytelling is fun too. Ooh, okay. And then after I graduated from high school, I graduated from Roosevelt Performing Arts High School. I went to LA and initially wanted to do music first. And then I met my manager and she was like, well, I mostly represent actors. And that was how that happened.
And the rest is history, right?
And the rest is history.
So Sophie, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Are you interested in acting or singing? What kinds of things do you like to do?
I used to be in the school band. I still have the instrument now, so I play it sometimes.
And what did you play?
In primary, I played the fiddle for like 2 months, gave up on that. And then trumpet, and then my music teacher was like, I've got 4 brand new saxophones that I bought. Do you want to try it? So I've been playing the saxophone for 8 years now.
Fantastic.
Wow.
So 2 musicians here, right?
So I play the cello, and it's like bowing is hard. it's so many things. So I get it. I played the viola for a minute, and I was just like, no, this is not, I want to sit down.
And Sophie, tell us a little bit more about the island you live on.
I've literally got down there, you can see the water.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So you live
I'm
right next to the water.
I live right across from the beach, so it's nice.
That is really cool. I'm very excited you're in Scotland. My last name, Munro, that's a very Scottish name, and I got to go to Scotland many years ago and get to see what a beautiful country it is.
The people in Scotland, like, y'all are beautiful people. I think that Edinburgh is the Chicago of Europe.
Sophie, is there anything else you want to ask Miranda?
What's your favorite part about playing Stella Kid?
The cast that I'm surrounded by. I would play any role on that show. Really, like, just because of who I get to interact with. Two, I love playing a firefighter. I love that I kind of get to, like, even in a very cathartic, like, psychoanalytical way, like, I get to play out like my hero fantasies. And I love that the writers allow her to be this multi-dimensional woman. Like, she is fierce and masculine and still very sexy. I love all of the different dimensions that I get to play with. I have a question. What would you want to see more of from Stella? And then what really makes you go, I want to know more about that?
For Stella, I want to see more of the Girls on Fire. I don't know, seeing Stella take action and be the leader and show up all the leaders when she went to that conference was something like so empowering, and that was something I liked. As for the relationships, probably more about like Cap and Tony's family, because you don't hear about them much. I've seen a lot on like the Chicago Fire fan pages. Everyone's seeing like edits of Brett and Cassie and questioning whether or not they're going to become a couple. So that's something I think all Chicago Fire followers would really, really like to see more of.
I'm going to tell the writers.
She's going to work on it.
I'm going to work on it. I love to hear, what you as a fan are like curious about and what you want to see more of and what you like and what you don't like. So thank you.
Miranda, you're playing this character who is inspiring women around the world. I mean, sometimes we forget what the reach of American culture is, and so I think that's a really wonderful thing. And it was so fun to listen to you sing on the Junior Company show. That was a real treat.
I know, little snippet. See, here's the thing. Junior Company, I love y'all so much. I'm so proud to be a former junior. The fact that you did this virtual cabaret for the community, initially didn't even want to have it be a fundraising event, I think speaks volumes to the beauty in your heart and the character in all of you. So I just honor you. I'm inspired by you. And thank you to all the parents, to Nicolette, to Julie, to everybody that keeps this foundation going. It changed my life. I know that it's changing the lives of kids who are involved. Sophie, for whatever it's worth, your energy is so beautiful. I really believe that you have so much to offer the world and your community, that you are gorgeous inside and out. And I encourage you to just continue to keep creating. And you even just were a channel for such wisdom for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Miranda. Thank you so much, Sophie, for staying up late in Scotland.
Oh my God, yeah, what time is it there?
It's actually just about 9:30, so.
Oh, okay, so that's not so bad.
All right.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you, Miranda, once more for giving your time to make a memorable moment for Sophie. Well, that wraps it up for this month's episode of the Munro Review. A big thank you to producer Kyle at CMAC. And a thank you to our guests, Jessica Garrison, Sophie Stephens, and Miranda Ray Mayo. Finally, for all of you, please keep exploring and supporting the local art scene. We'll see you next time.